Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's Facebook and YouTube live event. I'm Huma, and I'm your host for today's event. I'm also joined by Stephen, my co tutor in the Facebook chat. Stephen will be moderating the Facebook conversation today. Today is a very special event because we are celebrating the International Mother Language Day, which falls on the 21st of this month. And to mark this occasion, we've got a very special guest and an expert in the room, Justine Sass from UNESCO, who will be exploring multilingual education from a global policy and teaching perspective. Hello, Justin.
Hi, Huma. Thanks. I'm so happy to be here with everyone today.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today, Justin. It's truly a pleasure having you with us here. Let me briefly introduce Justin for you. Justine Sass. She's the chief of section inclusion and gender equality in education at UNESCO. Over the past 25 years, Justin has championed gender equality, the empowerment of girls and women, and the right to education and health in positions at UNESCO, other UN agencies, nonprofit organizations, and US government agencies. She believes that we all have a role to play in ensuring an inclusive and equitable society that leaves no one behind. So in today's conversation, we'll be moving between teaching, policy, equity, inclusion, and identity in the field of multilingual education. Oops, oh dear, we seem to have
I'm
lost
here, but I'm
Justin.
struggling. I'm
Oh, you're
sorry for
here.
this. My
Oh, you're back.
bandwidth doesn't seem to be appreciating this call, but I will do my best. Sorry, I'm back.
No
Can you see
problem
me
at
now?
all, Justin. Don't worry. We know, the drawbacks and challenges of dealing with technology. So don't worry at all.
Thank you.
All right. So,
Thanks
so
for
Justin's
understanding.
back. So just no problem at all. So Justin, let's welcome our audience. For our viewers, if you're here, please tell us who and where you are. And there's a question for you to answer. When you think about multilingual education, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Please comment and tell us in the chat and comments on Facebook and YouTube. So, Justin, at a micro level, as teachers, we often view multilingual education as teaching in more than one language. But from UNESCO's perspective, how does that fit into the global policy frameworks?
I'm sorry, the connection isn't very good, but I understand you've asked me to speak about what is multilingual education. Is that right, Huma?
That's right,
Okay,
yes.
sorry again for the connection issues.
No problem at
Multilingual
all.
education is an approach which uses two or more languages, multilingual in teaching and learning. So this can often include a student's home language or what we call their mother tongue, alongside a national language or a global language. It can also include supporting refugee learners, for example, to use their own language as they transition to the language in their own home country. We see in some cases multilingual education also being employed in settings where there is a strong promotion of the use of endangered languages or indigenous languages or minority languages. So there are a few different contexts of multilingual education, but in all of them, we're essentially trying to promote the use of one or two or more, sorry, languages. But I would like to say it's not only about languages.
Mm.
It's about inclusion. It's about equity. It's about respect, dignity, and inclusion. So the idea isn't only to speak languages, but to welcome diversity in all of its forms: cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and diversity in the different experiences that many learners have.
That's a very good point, Justin. So, Justin's trying to tell us that this is not just about pedagogy, it's also about peace, equity, and dignity. So, on that note, Justin, how do you think multilingual education influences inclusion for both teachers and students in academic settings?
So we see the benefits of multilingual education include inclusion, but they also include a number of other areas. So maybe I'll start with the
Mm,
first one, which is the one that's most often cited. So we say there are kind of four main areas that multilingual education, four main benefits, if you like, of multilingual education. The first one, as you've just said, Huma, is more inclusive, more equitable schools. So we see that it really strengthens cohesion. It connects learning with their communities and with cultures. As I've mentioned already, it supports Indigenous learners, it supports minority language learners, and refugees coming to new settings. So that would be the first benefit
Hmm.
that I'd like to highlight. The second one is learning. And this is often a misconception about multilingual education, that it might stall learning in another language, or stall learning in a global language. And we don't see this at all. We see that multilingual education improves learning outcomes. That includes literacy. Interestingly, it also includes other subjects beyond just literacy. It can improve numeracy, it can improve science skills, as we've seen, but it also improves critical thinking more broadly, problem solving, connecting different things. The third benefit is that it really promotes culture, protects culture, and it advances peace. So I've spoken about social cohesion, but we also see that the ability to be able to value other students' identities rather than erasing them really creates a much more peaceful, inclusive, and engaging learning environment. And the last benefit, if I might just add, is that these better skills transition in their futures. So we know that students who can speak multiple languages are more prepared for the world that we live in today, which is increasingly multilingual, increasingly connected, and demands these benefits, if you like, for innovation and for better economies. So it's not just about
That's great.
inclusion, it's
So
about all these other wonderful aspects of multilingual education.
yes, so as we understand, it's an approach that not only encourages the use of learners as language resources, but also could be used as a system that can help us build a more equitable and an inclusive space for the whole
Very much so.
community and the school. Justin, I'm going to look away at this point because we got people joining us from all around the world. So we got people in the audience from Sudan, Sri Lanka, Romania, Peru, Myanmar, Algeria, Angola, Malaysia, Ghana, Oman, and many other places. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. Justine Sass is from UNESCO, and she's here to talk to us about multilingual education. So please add your questions and comments to the chat. So, Justin, going back to the benefits, we've been talking about the benefits of multilingual education. I was looking at the UNESCO's policy paper. It also touches upon the socio emotional dimension and the identity dimension. Would
Very
you like
much.
to elaborate on this, Justin?
I mean, I think I've kind of spoken to this already, but when you value a learner's language, you also value their identity. You value their history, the stories that that we learn and are transmitted through languages. So it's an opportunity to connect the past with the present with the future. So you can do this in many different ways, whether it's and often this is one of the things we hear, is it very
Hmm.
complicated, how can I really do it if I'm not trained to do it?
Oh,
There are
yes.
easy ways to do it. You can, yes, I expect this might be one of the questions that some of our audience might have, but you can do it simply by having visual aids inside of the classroom. You can do it by pairing students inside of classrooms, supporting kind of peer connections, supporting learners to work across languages. We call it translanguaging, meaning that they might not know a full vocabulary, but they might use some of
Hmm.
their home words, and we support them to do this as they go along. And now with digital technologies, there's a lot more that we can find online and bring into classrooms as well to help support not only the language but also the cultural significance, the traditions, the stories that we see also inside of languages.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, Justin, because it's something that I also do in my classroom with my learners. I set up peer translanguaging groups where they can use their languages for mediation, and also, then use English for, interacting with students with peers who
Mhm.
don't share a common language with them, and also using multilingual word walls, multilingual signage in the
Exactly.
classroom and in the school settings. I think these are strategies that can help us, use or bring in other languages in our context. Um, there's a very good question here. Yes, Justin, go ahead.
I just wanted to give an example. I was in a school in Malta, and it was a
Mm.
public school, and they had 70 different languages inside of that
Ooh,
school. And it wasn't a very large school. Malta is, I think, 500,000 people on the island. So you can imagine the diversity in a classroom like that. And a teacher might say, how can I manage, let's say 20 languages in my classroom? And a lot of the strategies that you've just mentioned, Huma, are strategies that they were using inside of those schools.
that's great, and that's a very good example supported by
Mm,
research, Justin, because that's also a very popular question from our community members. They often ask us, "Oh, how can I work with my learners when there are so many different
mhm.
languages, especially when the teacher does not share those languages with the students?" So I think
Exactly.
the response would be to use students as your resources so they can help and support each
Uh-huh.
other. All right, so Justin, there's a very nice question here in the chat box, and that's about translanguaging. So the audience wants to know what translanguaging
Yes.
is.
Okay, so translanguaging is exactly what I think you've kind of just mentioned. So basically, you have students using their languages flexibly to be able to create meaning. So it's a learning strategy that helps learners to understand more deeply, and it helps them to transition to learning another language. So often, what we will see in translanguaging is that they will move from one or more languages to be able to create meaning in a sentence, right? But rather than telling students that they can't do that and they have to speak the language of the school, we're going to flexibly develop their language skills, and to frankly to be much more confident inside of the classroom.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I'd like to add a practical example
Please
here,
do.
Justin, from my classroom. For
Mhm.
example, I remember using a bilingual song. I'm based in the UAE, so the song was in English and Arabic in my classroom. So I created this peer translanguaging groups where the Arabic speakers came together to summarize the Arabic version of the song, and the non-Arabic speakers listened
Uh-huh.
to the English version, and they summarized the English version of the song. And then the students were regrouped, and they used Arabic and their languages to mediate and to come up with one, wholesome summary, of their understanding of the song, which they presented through various media such as posters, presentations, and their written works. So that's something that teachers
Yeah,
can do in their classroom.
it's a
Justin,
great
I mean,
example.
we've been talking about, thank you, Justin. We've been talking about some benefits. We've also been talking about some challenges. For example, we spoke about having a few different languages in the classroom. There's another question here about using L1. So the question is, what do you think of using other languages to teach English in the classroom? I think
I'm
this
sorry, I
question is
lost you for part of your
being
question.
asked
Can
because
you repeat it again?
Sure,
Uh,
sure, no problem. The question is, what do you think of using learners as languages L1 to teach English? And I think that this question is coming from the space where most teachers think that the using learners as languages can slow acquisition of other global languages such as English. So, how would you respond to school leaders and teachers who think that using other languages can slow down the acquisition of the target language?
Yeah, this is, I would say, probably the most common misconception that we
Yes.
hear, that using a learner's home language will slow down learning English or national language
Mm.
or any other language. But we actually see that it's the opposite. By ensuring that learners have a strong foundation in their own language, in their home language, in their mother language, actually accelerates the learning of additional languages. And as I said earlier, accelerates overall, academic outcomes. So it is actually the opposite. It's a myth, I would say. This concern.
Yeah, absolutely. Because from my own perspective and from my own experience in the classroom, I think when students don't understand the language of instruction, it can affect their self-esteem, affect their
So totally.
performance and engagement in the classroom. And research, especially in early years, education has proved that bringing in learners as languages can improve their self-esteem, improve attendance, and reduce dropout rates. I hope you agree with me,
I
Justin.
agree with you entirely. So we, in the guidance that you mentioned earlier, we see, and it's a figure that probably needs an update because, but
Mm,
um, we see that about 40% of learners don't learn in the language that they understand best.
yeah.
And we see exactly the challenges that you've mentioned. And it was interesting. I was in a meeting last week and they were saying it's not only about inclusion, it's not only about access, it's about belonging also. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
this word belonging is a very important word in education. And kids who feel like they belong feel accepted, feel motivated, they feel engaged to continue their learning journey. So when they're not learning in the language that they understand, they have the challenges that you've mentioned, and we do see higher dropout rates. And more difficulties with learning and belonging. And these are
Yeah,
not short term impacts; they are long term impacts.
absolutely. I mean, as a teacher, I also believe that when students come to class, they don't just bring themselves, they bring their languages, identities, communities, families, and their cultures too. And I think language forms a very important part of their identity. So if they can see themselves, and their identities in the classroom, then motivation naturally increases.
I agree with you entirely. Yes.
There are some very lovely comments here from our viewers, Justin. So there's a comment here that says that using other languages is a bridge to have an idea, for learning the new language. I think this is very
Yes.
true because I'm a multilingual speaker and a learner myself, and this is how I have learned other languages. What do you think about this comment, Justin?
Oh, I think it's a beautiful comment. It's a, it's a, it's a great, it's a great comment. I mean, I am also a multilingual person, and feel like once you learn a language, you learn how you learn, and so it almost becomes easier to pick up additional languages. But this notion of bridge is very beautiful.
Absolutely. Oh, there are some worries too in the chat. Justin, there's a
Huh,
comment here. I'm going to read this
okay.
comment for you. So, this teacher is saying, when I think about the number of languages in my context, I feel stressed because it can be difficult to manage and respond to everyone's language needs at the same time. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed trying to decide which language to use and how to make sure everyone understands without leaving anyone out. However, I do appreciate the richness and diversity that
Mm,
my students bring to class.
mm.
Any comment here, Justin?
I mean, my main comment would be that teachers need to be supported. It's not obvious when you're as a teacher in a classroom with so many different languages. So you do need some support for training, some support uh, to work with students with such diversity. This is particularly the case in large classrooms. But there are strategies, as you've mentioned, some of the strategies that are possible to do. But you need support from your school leader and from policies and from training, definitely. It's not
So just
impossible, but we appreciate the concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in talking about support, so what kind of support do you think school leaders and educational systems can provide to teachers who work in highly linguistically diverse contexts?
I would say the first is access to professional development. So whether that be, a new teacher entering into a classroom, with significant linguistic diversity, um, or ongoing professional training that can really help them to think about how languages can be a resource and not a barrier. And this is, thinking about how to apply the translanguaging strategies that you've just mentioned, how to think about assessing learners differently with inclusive assessments, and how they can bring other materials possibly into the classroom that can help them. So this needs to be supported with coaching, with some, connections to other teachers to support peer learning. I think school leaders need to help teachers feel confident to deliver multilingual pedagogy and inclusive classroom practice. And they do that when a school leader values also multilingual education and values this cultural and linguistic diversity inside of the school. The school I mentioned in Malta, it was quite interesting. In addition to the classroom settings that I was able to observe, they also did a lot of cultural
Mm.
events to support the cultural, to show case the food, the history also of the learners. And I think this connects also learners to the what we were speaking about earlier, this ginormous, this huge world that we live in, and all of its variety. It's a wonderful learning opportunity, I think, for children and young people to learn this way.
Justin, you mentioned culture. Then there's a question here that asks, how can interculturality and teaching culture affect learners in multilingual classrooms?
So we have seen, and is the question is particularly for young learners. That's quite interesting, because I would say it really applies for all learners. But
Yeah, indeed.
we would say that intercultural learning is of value for learners regardless of what age that they're at, for the reasons that I've outlined. But we've seen some very interesting models also. If I maybe just to give a practical example, in Latin America, in a number of countries, they've been supporting for decades now um, what is called international bilingual education. It's a model that is very much embedding indigenous languages and cultures into education. So and it supports learners to transition into the national language, but to start off their education early. And I think these types of programs are very important because again they're
Mm.
valuing learners' identities, their stories, their histories. And obviously, because it's been going on for decades, it's going on because it works, and they see a value, and they see benefits, as I mentioned earlier, in learning, but also very much in inclusion. In some contexts, I've mentioned also school systems are bringing in endangered languages, or languages that are
Mm.
not so much used. And again, this is to ensure that they don't disappear, because when they disappear, when a language disappears, alongside of the disappeared language is the culture and the histories and the traditions and stories. So it's also to safeguard and to ensure the vitality of languages, that we can promote the use of them in schools.
That's a very good point there, Justin, about safeguarding our languages. There, Justin, just going back to your point about professional development for teachers, I'd like
Mm-hmm.
to remind our audience that we are running a free course for teachers at the moment. It's called English in the Multilingual Classroom. So if you haven't signed up for this course, please do so. And we also have plans. We're also going to roll out another new course in the near future. It's called Including Learners as Languages. So please watch this space, for more professional development opportunities in the area of multilingual education. Justin, you were talking about safeguarding languages. So what advice would you give teachers and students for safeguarding their own languages?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, Use the home. I mean, the first thing I would say for teachers is that they should, to the extent possible, support learners to use their own languages inside of the classroom, not just for translation, but for
Mm.
thinking, for discussion, for creativity, for group work, for peer activities. Huma, you gave this wonderful example of how you're creating these kind of language rich spaces inside of classrooms. I think those are very important, alongside libraries, the visual word walls that you mentioned. You can have signs, multilingual signage across your learning spaces, integrating digital content and storytelling. And then again, the example you gave, which I really appreciated, how do we use songs and stories and local
Mm.
knowledge in schools and online? And I think parental engagement is really important. Parents often have concerns about languages inside of
Oh
schools,
yes.
and they can often be a barrier for us as teachers to communicate to parents, but we really need to show them how we are using local languages to keep them alive inside and outside of the school. And if I can just give one example, we for students. So I've spoken just now on teachers, but to give an example of students, last Friday we did a webinar with schools around the world. We had about 500 students and teachers from
Wow.
all over the place. You know, from Guatemala to Morocco, from India to I can't even remember the different schools that we had 5 main ones that were on screen, and then we had schools from all over the world that were also joining. And young people are we have to listen to them. So we have to understand what they see as important and how we can integrate their voices and their solutions into our education programs. This year, we have devoted International Mother Language Day to youth voices to try to listen to them and really think about how do they inform what we take forward. And young people, they believe in their languages. They believe that they're important. They believe that it connects them. Some of them are concerned about, we had some interesting questions, what if my language dies? Will it never come back? And
Oh
concerns,
dear.
that we hear from young people. So I think they can be advocates inside of school and outside of school for languages. They can be support, as you mentioned, Huma, to others, learners in the classroom, and they can
Yes.
help us improve how we teach and how we learn.
Thank you very much for those great ideas, Justin. You talked about advocacy. Well, I'd like to think about teachers here.
Yes.
So, what advice would you give teachers for advocating responsibly within their own educational systems? Because this can be tricky. They might have to face resistance, combat, attitudinal resistance from school leaders or from their school community. So, what would you like to say here, Justin?
Um, I guess, I mean, so I would say listen to what the children want also as a first part. Listen to what the evidence says. I mean, the evidence
Mm,
says that there are widespread benefits to multilingual education. So if you need access to some of those data, I'm sure your teaching course will cover that. Um, uh, and if you need those types of arguments, I think it's important. But there are a lot of examples. So I think if a teacher can have access to how is it working in other settings, what strategies might I be able to employ, what resources are available to me online or otherwise. Um, Look for those and do your best, because I do think it's a very important learning strategy that we as teachers uh, and school leaders.
absolutely. Justin, I'd like to add something there. I was telling Philippa only yesterday that there's something that I read somewhere. It's a quote that says that the chains that bind us are often only in our minds. So, because at
Okay.
the end of the day, school leaders and school management, they care about performance, student performance, and teachers, have those in their control. So you can use all the tools and strategies that are available to you to help your students achieve success, and using the languages is one of those, so why not use them,
Exactly.
while also considering the institutional constraints or the policies. There are some lovely comments here, Justin, which you might want to hear. There's a comment that says, language is a means to transmit the values and carry the beauty of English language and other languages from generation to another generation. That's so
I love that.
beautiful.
It's very beautiful
Yes.
and very true.
Yes, indeed. Very, very true. And there's one last question here for you, Justin. There's a
Oh,
comment and a question. It says children quickly adapt and blend in new contexts, which are completely different from those that adults experience. So, how can a language teacher intervene to facilitate things for biased parents? So, basically, we're talking about managing parental expectations here.
yes. Um, we outlined in our guidance a couple of strategies to work with parents. So I think, again, you have to reassure them that multilingualism increases opportunities. It doesn't take away from it. They're going to have better academic success. They'll have better opportunities for employment, and they'll have communication skills that they can take into different contexts. We also very much encourage teachers to think about how to try to engage them as partners. So, what are the materials that you might send home with them that could encourage language reading with them at home, storytelling with them at home, knowledge sharing about cultures and traditions, and how they might communicate with their learners in languages that families are most comfortable using inside of their homes. But we have to work with parents for these to be successful.
Absolutely, our
Also, yes, yes.
that changes the classroom environment for the better for themselves and for their children in the classroom.
Very much so. And if I could just say, this is actually what we see for when it's in home languages and mother tongues, that parents are more likely to engage inside of the classroom with their learners because they might not have the same confidence level that their children have in the national language or in the language of instruction. So it often
Great.
is a bridge for them to come into the schools and be more engaged and even support their children to learn and to thrive.
Justin, sorry, I lost you there for a moment.
I'm sorry, my connection is really problematic. Where
Don't
did you lose
worry.
me?
You were
No,
talking
my point,
about
if I
this
can
can
say
be
it
used
very
as a
briefly.
bridge.
Yes, I think, in this case, in some cases where parents do not speak the language of instruction or do not feel very confident or fluent in the language of instruction, it creates a bridge to support their children's learning. They're more likely to be involved in a classroom, involved in parent teacher interactions, and to support their child's learning.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. Justin, time has just flown by, and we've come nearly to the end of this conversation. So, Justin, thank you so much for taking, some time out, of your busy schedule for joining us here today. You
It's
helped us widen the lens beyond the classroom by quoting research and real classroom
it's a real
examples
pleasure.
for
Thank you
us
so much for
and
the
the teachers
invitation.
here. It's our pleasure having you here today, Justin. And a big thank you to the audience for joining us and for commenting and asking us questions. The fact that there are so many of you here and talking about this means that this work matters deeply. And we hope that this conversation has given you the confidence to move forward and make your educational context more linguistically inclusive and culturally inclusive for your learners. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Before we go away, there's a quick reminder. We'd like to invite you to join us on Thursday next week for another critical conversation. Stephen and I will be talking about climate action. So please join us on Thursday for our next live event. In the meantime, we'll see you online. Thank you, Stephen, Philippa, and Chris for moderating the event. Thanks once again, Justin, and thank you very much to all the audience members for making this event co- useful and successful for all of us. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody. You have a
Thank
good rest of
you.
the week and a good day ahead. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.
How to see more of our videos on YouTube. When using a shared device, check you're logged into your YouTube account. Do this by tapping the profile on the main menu. When sure you're in the right account, select Search from the top menu. Search for the British Council Teaching English channel and select it. Look down the page for British Council Teaching English. Tap on it. This is our channel. To be alerted whenever we share a video, tap Subscribe. Then tap Subscribed. Select All to be notified of all our new videos. To see these notifications, tap on the bell in the top menu.